Mark, your 90 seconds start now.
Fellow candidates, I applaud you for being here, and friends and neighbors, thank you for your commitment to engage in the election process. Whether you are here tonight or you are watching, just by taking this time, you are resisting the single biggest problem facing our community. I could start off here tonight by listing off a bunch of bio facts about myself, but there are two problems with that. First, I'd only choose the things that make me look really good. Like, I'm a St. Stephen dad of 2 kids in public school. I'm married to a wife who is a provincial public servant. I'm a lay minister in my church. I have a master's degree. I own and run my own corporate business in Charlotte County. I'd even throw in some things that make me look cool, like I have a motorcycle and I ski or something like that. But certainly I wouldn't tell you the unflattering things, like I lose my keys at least once a day. So I'm not going to do any of that. What I'm going to do, because there's a problem with that, and it's a top principle that I teach in business. In business and politics, you don't actually care about me at all until you believe I can help you solve your problem. And so that brings us back to the single biggest problem in our community right now, and it's this: you feel discouraged and you feel hopeless when it comes to your government. I've stood on your doorsteps and in your offices, and I know that our questions are not being answered and our problems are not being solved, and I'm running because I know the difference that a great MLA makes in other ridings, and tonight I'll show you how I'm going to be that MLA for you. Thank you.
Mark, what specific actionable steps will you take to both recruit and retain healthcare workers in our region, and how will you work to improve local healthcare services? Your 90 seconds start now.
One thing that has frustrated me as a resident here is, of course, the lack of doctors like many of us. Even more frustrating, though, is when I discovered that Green MLA Megan Mitten in Tantramar, well over 2 years ago, already cracked this problem. And that's one thing that we should feel encouraged about, is typically any problem we have here in St. Croix, someone else has already done it. That's both encouraging and discouraging at the same time. So Megan Mitten, years ago in Tantramar, where they have a hospital like ours, set up, started collaborating, found a place where Horizon, where their Vitalite could rent a building and attract and start to get that collaborative care working. So doctors, nurse practitioners get their chart in that building. They took all the medical orphans first. So I lost my family doctor, like many of you, and Dr. Jan Mohammed retired. I've also heard of many of you who are patients of Dr. Lister and Dr. Bagwanda who are not doing well, and you're in a worse kind of limbo because you can't get off that list, and you have a doctor, but you can't see your doctor. We feel sorry for them because they are not well, but you are trapped. And so what happens is your chart is in a medical home where you can see a doctor or nurse practitioner, a nurse. It's based on your need care, and that is the kind of thing we want to get setting up right away as a Green Party, not just with a brick and mortar place, but allowing doctors to start speaking with each other in collaboration with the hospital so you can get care immediately before we even find a building. That's the plan of the Green Party, and that's what I'll work on as your MLA.
Concrete steps will you implement to address homelessness in the St. Croix riding, particularly in St. Stephen, to ensure that individuals have access to shelter and necessary resources this winter? Your 90 seconds start now.
Well, I think as a society we want to eliminate the need for out-of-the-cold shelters, although we need to take steps for that to happen. But if this is a question about housing and out of the cold in 90 seconds, there's no way to answer that. So I'm going to address the housing one. The cost of rents have gone up about 40% in New Brunswick since 2019. The wait list for affordable housing has doubled over the last 4 years. Now, there's two kinds of housing. There's market housing and there's affordable housing. Market housing is whatever anyone will pay for a private house on the market, and that just continues to go up, which means there's always going to be a percentage of the population at the bottom who cannot keep up, and that's where affordable housing comes in. Now, NB Housing is working on 5 units here in St. Stephen, a grand total of 5, and we are losing affordable units faster than we can build them, so we're not going to build our way out of this crisis. So a solution as your MLA is to, as a Green Party, we're going to implement 2.5% rent caps. That means the rent cannot go up any higher than 2.5%. We're going to give municipalities and nonprofits first right of refusal on any low-income, low-cost housing that comes into the market so that they can capture those and keep them low low rent housing. And then we're going to give nonprofits and co-ops the capital they need to invest and build in multi-rental units. Because again, if you just let these things go into the private market, costs will continue to go up, and that's not what we can afford. So we can't and we won't feel safe until we're all housed and can afford to stay in our homes as we choose. And only the commitment of the provincial government can make that happen, and that's why we need to do that.
Moving on to question 3. This question is about affordable housing, so if you felt you tackled that more in the last question and you prefer to talk about homelessness more here, that's all up to you. Mark, you will start us off with this question. With rapid population growth and increasing demand for housing, affordability in rural areas is becoming a crisis. What immediate measures will you advocate for to increase the supply of affordable housing, and how will you collaborate with local governments to implement these changes?
When I started my campaign early in May, 5 things. Some of you see the button. The first thing is, of course, affordable housing, which renters are being forced out, and so we knew we needed measures on that. That's why the Greens are implementing a 2.5% rental freeze. And for people who own properties, we are seeing skyrocketing rates. The government introduced something called a spike protection, which is supposed to be good news. Your property tax is only going up 10%. Congratulations. The assessments they make no sense. They're out of control. Our property values are tied to the real estate market. For some of us, our house is not a commodity. We plan to live in it forever and even die in it. So we are seeing, when I'm knocking on doors, people are saying there's no improvements happening. Assessments are increasing. It doesn't make any sense. So some solutions as your MLA for property owners is to reform the property tax system so it's fair. The Greens will launch a public inquiry for a revamped assessment system. We want to give municipalities the ability to set their own tax rates. Did you know that St. Stephen, for example, can't set its own tax rates? It has to go to the government for approval. And also, in provincial law, corporations can only be taxed 1.7% more than a residential house. That means a company that's making $1 billion is only paying 1.7% more than grandma down the street. That makes no sense. We need to decouple that so that we have rates that make sense for every single resident, and it's fair to New Brunswickers. Thank you.
Mark, with rising utility rates and the overall cost of living becoming a significant burden for many residents, what specific policies will you push for to help ease the financial strain on the people of St. Croix?
Just want to go back to something Ms. Bacchus said. Indeed, this government has set policies in place, very vague, we're not sure what they are, to keep rents down to around 2.5%, which is kind of like pixie dust. Did you know that in the last year, rents have gone up 11%? So there's the goal, and there's the target, and then there's the reality. It's not working. Only a rental cap works, and that's why we are capping it at 2.5%. Also, when your rent goes up, it is the onus of the tenant, as Ms. Bacchus said, to apply to the board to say, please don't raise my rent. We want to see that switched. It should be, the onus should be on the landlord to justify why they need to raise the rents. I knocked on the door of a gentleman who said his rent went up 14% here in St. Stephen. It is not sustainable. Also, essential groceries are not taxed. We know this. So when we're saying a 2% tax cut is intelligent, it's simply not. Rent is not taxed and essential groceries are not taxed. And so the way we feel about that is we are giving tax cuts to people buying power boats, but not really getting to the heart of the issue. Also, there's I only have 90 seconds here, people. There's a 4-cent gas tax that you are paying to help Irving clean up the fuel from the federal regulations. Did you know that? 4 cents. We're going to get rid of that right away. We don't feel safe when the cost of everything is going up, and Greens have a plan to target our essential expenses in a way that's strategic and intelligent.
Mark, where do you stand on the Campobello ferry issue, and what specific actions will you take to make this ferry service a reality if you support it? Or if you don't support it, can you explain why?
I was door knocking in Campobello a few weeks ago, knocked on the door, a lady opened and said, another damn politician promising me a ferry who's not going to deliver. I said, well, give me a chance. I do want you to take note that apparently we have an MLA who fully supports the ferry but could not get it done with a majority government. This is the scourge that our riding is facing. For some reason, we are not seeing action with a majority government with an MLA of the same color. Deer Island has a ferry, and it is unacceptable and inexplainable why Campobello does not. I talked to a restaurant owner and grocery store owners who say that they can't get their food delivered apart from one truck because, of course, they can't get their huge food trucks on a barge. I talked to a contractor who said he can only go through Kent to get his supplies, and they deliver only on Tuesdays and at a huge shipping cost, etc. I talked to a landscaper. He wants to grow his business. He can't get workers to come over there and pay $50 round trip on a ferry, so he can't grow his business. This is a housing issue for Campobello. They can't get things built because they can only go through trucks that have a bond through the United States. I couldn't get campaign signs at Campobello without begging the United States for permission to get my green signs through. This is not acceptable. This is another case where it's going to be $1.9 billion for the ferry, and yet we have a government that says, you know what, let's cut the HST. We don't need $500 million of revenue. Well, Campobello needs $1.9 million for a ferry, I can tell you that.
Mark, given the increasing severity of climate change and aging infrastructure in our rural communities, what specific priorities would you address first to modernize infrastructure while making St. Croix more resilient to climate-related disasters?
I heard the words mild hit earlier. 2022, Hurricane Fiona was the most expensive and devastating weather event in Atlantic Canada's history. So yes, I'm glad we're using the word modernize for infrastructure. We also need to modernize our forestry practices. So two things that are facing our riding specifically are flooding and forest fires. We saw the devastation that happened in Boquebec just nearby. Now, one thing we want to see right away is an end to spraying glyphosate because specifically what this is doing, in addition to poisoning our water and our land, is it completely dries out huge swaths of forest. And when the companies come back in and replant, they're only planting the conifer trees that they want to harvest that they know will lease back to them 25 years later. Well, those swaths of land with only conifers go up like matchsticks, and they are extremely prone to fires. And so we want to do what Quebec did. In 2001, they banned the spraying of glyphosate, and they do manual silviculture. They don't allow that kind of clear cutting because it is an immediate threat to our communities in our riding. We also, as Greens, will establish a coastal protection agency. I was door knocking in Dufferin. I met a man who was on the hook himself to build his seawall up from 6 feet to 8 feet. There's nowhere he could apply for funding for that. I asked him, you had to pay for that? He said, yes, if we don't want water in a backyard, we have to do that. A safe environment in a changing climate is fundamental to survival, and Greens are going to take preventative measures we need to make sure we're safe in a changing world.
Thank you, Mark. Mark, how would you work to address the rising crime in our region, and would you advocate for the return of the Charlotte County Courthouse?
I'm surprised once again to hear our former MLAs in favor of the courthouse with a majority government, and we don't see any movement on that at all. One thing we know in our communities is that we need more police patrols, and that is not happening. Macadam and Campobello, they both know when they call, nobody's coming, and there has been resorting to pretty extreme measures in those communities as they feel like they need to handle their own problems. Now, currently, we have about 35 RCMP officers in our Southwest Service Commission 10. The only plan of this current government is to give us one more officer, bringing that grand total to 36, and we're not going to see many more patrols from that. So the most immediate measure we can do to get police responsive and available is to get that courthouse back in St. Croix. A couple of years ago, Mayor Brad Henderson had a meeting with the Minister of Public Safety, spoke with him directly and said we need more officers, we need a courthouse, and we need mobile crisis units, because we know that when a trained professional accompanies a police officer to a call, 80% of the time that call is resolved by the mobile crisis worker, because typically it's a mental health issue and the officer can go somewhere else. These are immediate measures that we can take. What we are seeing when the courthouse was removed in 2015 is yet more an erosion of our rural services. We are 50% rural as a province. We are 100% rural as a riding. We got to stop these erosions, and that's why we will see the courthouse back in this riding, so there'll be more police on patrol to keep us safe.
Mark, what is the biggest challenge facing our education system, and how would you address it?
Well, two major crises facing our schools right now are hungry kids and a lack of teachers and a lack of support staff for those teachers. Just last week, I did an interview for the St. Stephen High School newspaper. And when I was leaving, a teacher actually came bolting out of the building after me and said he wanted to talk to me about how he's a teacher there now, but when he went through his education training, teacher's college, he said there was a cohort of 6 of them, 6 friends who went through. They all did 1 year of teaching and quit. He is the last teacher of the group. They all went into finance or something less exhausting. And so what we are seeing is a total lack of support of teachers, for teachers, half measures from this government yet again. And so what we want to do as Greens is collaborate with the unions. This feels a lot like the nurses, where we can't get nurses to stay and we can't keep nurses once we have them because they are so inadequately funded. This is happening with teachers. We need to work with unions and implement a retention and recruitment strategy for school staff so that they get the supports they need. Also, when it comes to hungry kids, this is the other issue. New Brunswick has the second highest rate of food insecurity in Canada, only behind Alberta. And in our riding, an estimated 1 in 3 children are in food insecure households. That is why a Green government, and I will be advocating for breakfast and lunch programs which pay for themselves in the long run so that kids are hungry and so that families of 2 have $3,000 more in their pockets over the course of a school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. All right, so we are going to start your last 2. You get 2 minutes for your final words tonight. Mark, your 2 minutes for your closing statement start now.
Well, friends, neighbors, you've heard a lot tonight. Thank you for your attention. In closing, I just want to take off my candidate hat for a moment and talk to you as a fellow resident. I want to tell you why I'm fearful and why I'm hopeful. I'm fearful that our riding is once again going to fulfill the definition of insanity, that what we've done and always done, and we're going to just expect a different result. Think about how you feel about government right now. Discouraged and hopeless. And that feeling is well earned by the past governments, liberal and conservative, stripping away rural services, ignoring our questions and priorities, and setting the agenda for St. Croix from Fredericton. And how have they done it? They've done it with a disempowered MLA, a good person, one of us, but someone who can only repeat and repost what their party leader wants for us. It's what's been happening for 4 years, apparently. You've heard it tonight. And it's what's going to happen again. And friends, that's what scares me. But here's why I'm hopeful. We talked a lot about problems tonight, and at the same time, there are hundreds of community leaders and volunteers in St. Croix. Yes, I'm looking at all of you whose work and ideas just need the support of a strong MLA. An MLA who's empowered by their party and leader to advocate for this riding. An MLA who sits at the meetings, learns the needs, finds the solutions, and clears the obstacles, and holy mackerel responds to your calls and emails. So I'm asking you, no matter how you voted before, this time lend me your vote. If I don't deliver, you can go back to the same old colors as before, I promise. But this time, you have the chance to go from discouraged to heard, and from hopeless to excited. It's happening in other ridings, friends, and I commit to making it happen in our beautiful place so that we can all thrive together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.